Hello and welcome back to the Warsaw Security Forum, one of the largest events of the kind in Central and Eastern Europe. I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska from TVP World, and it is my pleasure to have our first interview with Anna Lührmann, the Minister of State for Europe and Climate from Germany. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
An absolute pleasure. I wanted to talk to you about the future of democracy, the events which are taking place in Ukraine, and how changes that are taking place in Europe could potentially affect the sort of support that Ukraine is getting from us right now. And I wanted to begin by talking about the rise of eurosceptic parties across Europe, something that we've seen in recent times. We've seen an unprecedented election victory in Austria by far-right Freedom Party, and we heard from Mr. Kikel, who said that this victory opens a new era, to quote him. We heard from the incumbent Chancellor from OVP saying that it's, I quote, impossible to form a government with someone who adores conspiracy theories.
Putin.
And we also saw the election results in East Germany with ADF in the east state of Thuringia. And I wanted to ask you, this experiencing of rise of eurosceptic parties across Europe, what is the future of Europe and why is it taking place right now?
Yeah, this rise of eurosceptic party is something that worries me deeply, because what these parties want is in essence something completely different and much more insecure than the world and the Europe that we're living in right now. I mean, look around. The European Union is one of the most secure, one of the most prosperous places in the world. Many people around the world envy us for what we have achieved here since World War II, and particularly since the fall of the Iron Curtain, an area of prosperity, of peace, of freedom. I mean, these are conditions that are really precious, and it's something that we need to protect. And now we see a rise of these parties that challenge exactly the way how we've achieved it, because we have achieved it by overcoming nationalism, by overcoming egoistic interests, and by saying, let's work together and make us all stronger. And now these parties that are rising are parties that adore Putin, that adore this kind of nationalistic aggression that has already destroyed our continent over and over again. And this is something, therefore, that we really need to fight against. And that's what I'm doing with all my heart.
Yeah. Why do you think this is taking place? Because obviously the voters are voting for these parties. Yeah. So what would be the reason behind it?
Well, we really see a world in turmoil at the moment, right? We had the corona pandemic. We had Putin start his brutal war of aggression. We have digitalization. We have many changes in society and the world. And I think this makes many people feel quite insecure. So they're looking for easy answers to these very complicated problems. And there are parties around, like AfD in Germany, that gives them these easy answers. And I think that is in essence the problem, that these parties that find easy scapegoats also for these kind of problems, that promise going back into an old golden era, attract so much followership. And I think we as Democrats need to make clear that we have answers to these problems that might be at first sight a little bit more complicated, maybe also require some more work, some more effort.
Some roundabout effort.
Exactly, but in the end it will be a world that's more prosperous, more peaceful and more stable. It's a bit like in your personal life, no? If sometimes you take the easy way of sitting on your couch instead of going to the gym.
Making an effort.
But I think in the end you feel better if you actually do the effort and if you don't go the easy way.
We here on the continent we have the European Union, so we have a union that is that the initial idea was to put us together, make living easier, make cooperating easier. But with the rise of those parties, I wonder if this is going to lead to some sort of a paralysis when it comes to exchanging information, when it comes to cooperation. What are we to expect from this taking place?
Yeah, indeed. For instance, in Germany, it makes governing more difficult if we have a party in parliament that challenges the very way of how we work together, right? So we need to find new ways of finding democratic answers to problems, also in the European Union, that doesn't allow governments that challenge our values to actually block us. And this is also one of the reasons why we are working so hard to actually also find some ways of reforming the European Union, to make sure that also the European Union actually applies its values, the rule of law, democracy, clearly also to member states, so that we don't have to fear that if these nationalistic parties come to government, that they actually block the whole of the EU from working together, for instance, in the field of security.
When we look at those parties, I sometimes wonder if, for example, their isolationistic policies could actually affect, for example, in Germany, the way in which support for Ukraine is being granted. Do you think that the sort of trend that we see in Europe overall and in Germany after the recent election in the east of the country could potentially affect the way in which help is distributed to Ukraine?
It's very clear that parties like the AfD challenge our support to Ukraine, which is why we as Democrats are fighting so much for majorities to keep on supporting peace and security in Europe, and also supporting the right of Ukraine to defend itself. And as of now, we have a very clear majority in Germany, and I think we need to make clearer maybe to our citizens that it's our own security interest that is at stake here. If we let Putin get his way with Ukraine, he will challenge other countries in Eastern Europe. He will challenge our own security. And therefore, we need to put up a clear stop sign towards Putin and show that he will not achieve his aims with military aggression, not in Ukraine, not anywhere else in Europe.
So what's the stop sign? What would have to happen, and what are the next steps that the member states and Europe as a continent should take in order to stop this from happening?
Well, first, I think it's important to remember that Putin didn't achieve his initial aims in Ukraine. He thought he could march onto Kiev and just take it. He was very much surprised by the resoluteness, the bravery of the Ukrainian people, and by their Western supporters. Polish government, US government, also Germany now is the second largest donor of military aid.
Well.
UK, many
Massive
governments
support
around Europe. And therefore I think this is already showing to Moscow that, well, you miscalculated. We stand behind Ukraine, and we will stand there for as long as it takes.
And regarding the future of the conflict, based on the experience and the experiences of your colleagues in government, how long do you think this conflict could go on for, especially considering the geopolitical and the geopolitical situation, not only here on our continent, but globally?
Well, the conflict could end tomorrow if Putin would withdraw his troops. I mean, this is the situation that we're facing in Ukraine every day.
Unfortunately, that might be the scenario that is going to happen anytime soon.
But exactly that is also the problem. Also the problem in part of the debate in Europe. It's clear that if Moscow would stop fighting, the conflict would be over. If Ukraine would stop fighting, then Ukraine would be over, right? And therefore, we have to support Ukraine for as long as it takes, so that it's very clear that a resolution to the conflict can be found. I attended the peace conference also in Switzerland that we had in spring, where it was clear that the world wants peace for Ukraine. Ukraine wants peace. The one who doesn't want peace at the moment is Vladimir Putin, and I think we need to send clear signals to him also as world community that we are ready for durable peace, and that also, I mean, he lost again at the UN last week, or 2 weeks ago, remember, when we had the Summit of the Future in the UN. The whole world agreed on a document saying that we need multilateralism, we want to work together in the world. Putin tried to stop this document, and literally everyone in the world, also all African countries, said, no, stop your games, don't destroy our United Nations, we want a different world. And I think that's another of these clear signs that he's becoming increasingly isolated, and therefore I'm confident that we will find a way to a peaceful end of the conflict.
Speaking of finding a peaceful end to this conflict, I wanted to refer an information that was given in the Zeit yesterday about a potential phone call between German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Vladimir Putin. Apparently, Mr. Scholz is planning this ahead of the G20 summit, which is supposed to take place in Brazil in November. And this would be the first phone call since 2022. I wanted to ask you if it's possible that this phone call is going to take place, and what could be the possible outcome that we could expect after such a phone call? Because we know that different European leaders actually had the last phone call about 2 years ago when it came to having a direct contact with Mr. Putin.
Such phone call is currently not planned. It could be that along the lines of also Ukraine's effort for their peace formula, such an engagement might be needed. That's also something that the Chancellor said in his summer interview a couple of weeks back. But it's very clear that the direction of this path to peace is determined by Ukraine, and we're in close consultations here.
Since we are talking on the subject here, I also wanted to refer to our colleagues from La Repubblica from Italy. They cited the parliamentary sources and reported on September 9th that Mr. Scholz and some of his party members were looking into developing a plan similar to the Minsk agreement. But considering the Minsk agreement from years back, this could involve a potential handover of land to Russia. Would this be possible? Is this an information that we should take at face value, or this is something that is not even considered? No,
it's very clear that the Minsk formula failed, and that Moscow is not to be trusted, and therefore I think it is very clear that Ukraine needs to be supported by us Europeans to be in a very, very good negotiation position. And it's also very clear that once negotiations take place, that we need very credible and clear security guarantees, because as we've seen in Minsk, any kind of sort of just a signature by Vladimir Putin is not really worth much.
Last but not least, I wanted to ask you about something that is definitely going to have an influence on the region. We have the upcoming US presidential election in November, and things could change quite drastically for NATO and for the future support for Ukraine in case if former President Donald Trump were to win again. What do you think should be the strategy for the European countries to be able to keep Mr. Trump interested and keep him within the structures and help and actually provide help for Ukraine? What do we do?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's very clear that the elections will be decided in November, so they're not decided yet, and it's up for the US citizens to decide on how these elections will turn out.
It's still a reason for concern to many.
Yes, and what we need to do as Europeans, I think, is first to be very clear that we invest more in our security ourselves. And here I find Poland actually very inspiring. Poland already in the last years has invested a lot in Polish security, and therefore also in our security. I mean, in our collective security, exactly. And I think that's something that we all need to do in Europe. Germany has stepped up now its investment in defense to the 2% target, but it's very clear that we need to also work closer together in Europe for this kind of security. And I think that's the number one answer on no matter how the US elections will turn out. It's very clear that the US is also occupied with many other conflicts in the world, Middle East, also looking to the Pacific. And therefore, I think it's in our own interest to make sure that we're resilient ourselves, to invest in security, and also to make sure, to come back to the beginning of our conversation, to make sure that also our populations are resilient against the threats from Russia, because what we see currently is also massive disinformation campaigns going on, hybrid threats, sabotage, and therefore that's my best answer to what we might see in the US.
All very poignant. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, that was Anna Lührmann, Minister of State for Europe and Climate from Germany. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. Please remember to stay tuned here on TVP World.